Did Panasonic make the perfect camera with the S1R Mark II? So what does the Panasonic S1R Mark II tell us about Lumix lineup? To me, this feels more like an S9 II moment, where they've released sort of like a photo-centric hybrid camera, and then a couple of months later, then they're going to release a better video-centric camera, which in the case of the S9 Mark II was the GH7, but then in the case of the S1R Mark II will be the SH1 Mark II. Which is all fine and good, but if that's what they're gonna do, they probably should have let people know. Just announce that intention along with the S1R II, because I don't know that the S1R II is going to sell super well as it is. It's an awesome camera, and I'm getting one, don't get me wrong, but I think people saw what happened with the S9 Mark II and will wait. I also don't know that this camera is positioned correctly in the current marketplace, right? Like, I don't know if there's enough that's differentiated about the S1R Mark II, especially without a stacked sensor, that would make someone move from Canon, Nikon, or Sony. I also don't know that the S1R Mark II is a strong enough entry on its own to get people to join Lumix over other systems when they're thinking about buying into a mirrorless camera system. So while I'm personally very excited about the S1R Mark II, and for me it might be pretty darn close to a perfect camera, I don't think Lumix quite positioned this camera correctly in the marketplace. I think they should have either made it a competitor like the Canon R6 Mark II and the Sony A7 IV and probably A7 V coming out. I tend to think that the A7 V coming out is going to have 35 or 40 megapixels. So then the S1R Mark II kind of like is just a little bit better than that, right? They should have called it the S1 Mark II and had it compete against those cameras. Maybe put it at like 2800 or even 2500, right? Similarly, along those lines, if they had called it the S1 Mark II, they could then come out with either like an S1R Mark II with a stacked sensor that's more like $3,500 or $3,800 that would compete with the Nikon Z8 or Z9 and kind of the Sony A1 Mark II and then certainly the Canon R5 Mark II. You know, that R doesn't have to stand for resolution. It could stand for like, I don't know, like richer features or something. I don't know. But, you know, that R could mean something. Or they could put like S for speed. It doesn't have to keep with the R. But I think it makes more sense to do an S1. You know, it's like the entry level flagship, as it were, just like they did with the original S1, S1R, and SH1. Right, or S1H. I feel like the S1R Mark II is more like the S1 camera, right? No stacked sensor, like pretty good megapixels, but not super high resolution. There's 61 megapixel full frame sensor cameras out there, right? Like the SL3. They could have done a rebadge of the SL3 and made that the R camera and then have this pretty awesome hybrid as the S1, you know, Mark II. You know, that was kind of the original lineup, right? Like that S1 was supposed to be sort of the middle ground with the higher resolution camera having basically no video features, but better resolution. And the H version being lower resolution, but like way better video features, you know? And then the S1 was the middle ground. The S1R Mark II feels like a middle ground camera. It feels like a middle of the pack camera. It is not really a flagship. Now, I don't think that Lumix ever said that it was a flagship camera or a flagship killer, like so many YouTubers have said, right? They just said it's the best camera they've made yet, which to me is almost like a wink or a tip of the hat that like in a couple of months, a better camera is coming out than this one, right? I'm not sure anyone's picked that up, but I'm pretty sure that's what they're saying. To me, the S1R Mark II could kind of be like, you know, you mashed up a Sony A7R V with an FX3. You smashed those two cameras together, and the beloved child they made was the S1R Mark II. It's got really good video features, and it's pretty high resolution, right? It might even be better than both of those cameras, because like it can shoot faster, and it might have better color fidelity too. It's an interesting choice to use that DJI, or probably use the DJI, whatever it is, 4D, Ronin, blah, 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 8K sensor. You know, I think that's a real open question here is like, is the image quality more cinema-like with that sensor? Is the color fidelity, you know, color retention, the shadows, those kinds of things so much better that it made sense to forego a stacked sensor? If not, you know, I think we are competing in that sort of more like A7R5 range and not A1 Mark II range, right? You know, similarly, I think this camera is more of a competitor to the original Canon R5, not the Canon R5 Mark II. To put it in Nikon terms, I would say this is more of a Nikon Z3. This is the Z3 that like Nikon hasn't promised to make, but lots of Nikon users want, like higher resolution. They don't care about a faster scanning sensor, and a smaller, more compact body, right? I don't really think the S1R Mark II competes well against the Z8 simply because the Z8 has a stacked sensor. Also, it's sort of interesting that the Z8 is right now on sale for $3,400, only $100 more than the S1R Mark II. So that kind of hurts Lumix's argument that they needed to put a not stacked sensor in the camera to save on cost, because like it was $100 difference, they definitely should have gone with the stacked sensor. And I will say there's a big part of me that wishes that Lumix had put a stacked sensor in this camera in the S1R Mark II, just so they could say, this camera stomps literally like every camera on the market, and it's way cheaper than A1 Mark II. It's cheaper than Canon R5 Mark II, and it's priced similarly to a Z8. That would have been such a smarter move in my opinion, such a smarter market positioning in my opinion. Or, come out with the S1R Mark II as the S1 and then indicate that there's going to be an R or an S or something that has a stacked sensor so it's coming, right? Because otherwise, the S1R Mark II is a better camera than any Canon, Sony, or Nikon out on the market, right? It's got better features. It's got false color, Now it's got the shutter protector. It's got a joystick. It's got the whole exposure triangle right on the camera. It's a nice compact size. I'm pretty sure the grip is going to be quite comfortable. It's got 32-bit float audio with the adapter thing on the top that I'm using right now on my S5 II. It's like Panasonic listens to its users, and this camera, the S1R Mark II, shows it. It's got like literally every hardware thing I've been talking about and complaining about for other manufacturers for years now. It's got it all. The only thing missing, the only thing that isn't top in class as compared to other full frame competitors is that stacked sensor. So if they just put it in there, it would be like, stomp. We got everything. It's got literally everything. The only other feature I can think of that the S1R Mark II doesn't have is highlight blinkies in live view for photo. And they could easily put that in with a firmware update. Leica does that with their cameras. They just need to borrow those couple of lines of code, sprinkle it in, and boom, we're done. You've got literally everything I want in a camera and more, including bragging rights. So I just don't get it. I don't know why they put the stack sensor in. Again, I have not actually used the camera, so it could be that this non-stacked 44 megapixel sensor, which is actually less resolution than the original S1R, which was at 47 megapixels, right? It could be that this has like amazing image quality, and like, a couple of YouTubers have talked about it, but like, I don't know if a lot of like pro photographers have really used it, so it'll be interesting to see if the image quality is like super better than a Z8, or a Sony camera, which I could see it. Panasonic colors are better in my opinion, that might sort of justify this choice, but as it stands right now, it feels like it should have been a stack sensor in there. So I think how this all came to be, and this is just my guess, can be answered by taking a little walk down memory lane. When the S1, the S1R, and the S1H came out, they got slammed by critics because they were big and heavy like DSLRs. They were more expensive than other full-frame cameras. They weren't necessarily totally feature-packed. And most importantly, they only had contrast-based autofocus that honestly was trash. So I think that, Panasonic saw all those things they got slammed for and tried to fix them all in the S1R Mark II. Unfortunately, I think they focused on these too much and kind of missed the overall market landscape picture. They kind of missed the forest for the trees. Right? So, in terms of autofocus, which I think was really the only problem with the S1R, was like that camera was great otherwise. It had good battery life, better than the S1R Mark II, I note. I liked the build quality. I liked the screen on top. I didn't mind the heaviness of it. I loved how robust it was. But like, to me, it was unusable. I tried to shoot just like a ballroom dance event, and it could not keep up with that. And I was like, I am so done with this camera. This is so annoying. Like, the dancers weren't even moving that fast, But it's sad to me because otherwise the camera was great for my needs. Panasonic fixed this autofocus problem 2 cameras ago, right? In the S5 II, the S5 IIX, and now the S9. The autofocus works super well. They keep improving it. I would say they're like pretty much on par with Nikon now, or getting really close, and they may be biting on the heels of, Canon and Sony before long, especially given the pace of their firmware updates every like month or two. I don't understand how Fuji can't do this. Panasonic came out with phase detect autofocus like 2 cameras ago. Fuji's been at it for 5 years, 10 years, I don't know. But, impressive job. They've done it. They fixed that, right? Great. To me, I think a lot of people kind of felt the same way as me, that like the real reason those cameras got slammed was not necessarily the price, but it was the price and then the bad autofocus, right? If they'd had good autofocus, I don't think people would have complained about the price. Unfortunately, I think that Panasonic took that on the chin, got too focused on fixing the price and the feature set, and that clearly they fixed the feature set issue. It's got basically everything you could want, except for highlight blinkies and a couple other things I'll talk about in my S1H II section of this video in a second here. They fixed the size. It's the same size as the S5 II, give or take, so that was fixed too. But then I think they got way too fixated on price. Like every other camera since then has been cheaper than the competition. Feature packed, compact, all that stuff, good autofocus now, and then significantly cheaper than the competition. I don't know that reviewers really cared as much about it. I think it was because the cameras had bad autofocus that the price was so galling, right? If they'd had state-of-the-art autofocus, it would have been fine and the price wouldn't have been such a big deal. And I think they should have moved away from this with the S1R Mark II and put that stack sensor in. But they didn't, and I think that's what happened. I think they got too focused on cost cutting, making this considerably cheaper than the competition, so they put the non-stack sensor so it would be under $3,500, kind of putting it in between, most flagships, Canon R5 Mark II, Nikon Z8, Z9, and then, the sort of like more middle of the road beginner pro cameras like the R6 II from Canon and the Nikon, I guess Z5, Z6 II or Z6 III now, I guess. I got a Z6 III, so that's what it would be. That are like $2,500. I think maybe the R6 II, like totally new, is $3,000, but you can find it for $2,500 pretty often. They kind of put it in between those price-wise, between that sort of beginner pro, camera and then the flagship models. I think that was a mistake. I think they should have just put the stack sensor in because everything else says flagship. Just put the flagship sensor in there. Make it $3,800 if that's what you got to do. That's still cheaper than the Z8 at MSRP. It's still considerably cheaper than the Canon R5 II and definitely cheaper than the Sony A1 II. And feature-wise, joy of use-wise, now that's a snappier camera, I understand also, like you would have killed it. As it is, you kind of made this question mark thing, I think, at some point, Panasonic's got to let this price thing go. So hopefully, they do this with the S1H II. They let it go a little bit more, and the S1H II is truly the flagship camera. Or they do an S1R Mark II X, a blacked out version that has the stack sensor, and that is $500 more. I'm good with that. I'd buy that camera in a heartbeat. Again, depending on image quality, because if the image quality off this like DJI Ronin sensor is awesome, better than stack sensors, for me, rolling shutter, not that big of a deal. Super fast shooting, not that big of a deal in most cases, and I could get the blacked out S1R Mark II for those cases, but I would probably use the S1R II normal more often if that's true. But if not, I'd much rather spend the $500, get the blacked out sweet version, and then get that faster shooting camera. Like that's much more the camera I want, But, let's hold out hope for the S1H Mark II. What does the S1R II mean for the S1H Mark II? I think based on all the feedback in the S1R Mark II, it's almost inevitable that the S1H II has to be a fast scanning sensor, either a stack sensor or maybe even a global sensor, some kind of cinema sensor. That would be really interesting. I think a lot of people want a box camera, but I think that's a, S1R Mark II versus S1R Mark II X blacked out version kind of a situation where they'll come out with an S1H II in the same body style as the S1R II. First, it's got the fans in it, it's got the fully articulating screen, all that great stuff, and then maybe down the line, if it sells super well, then they'll make the box camera version of it. The S1H II can't have rolling shutter in it. Like the S1R II, like that's what's getting slammed on is dynamic range and rolling shutter, right? They've got to have a sensor that fixes those issues in the S1H Mark II, and I think they will. A couple of little hardware features for me aren't a huge deal necessarily because I am photo first, but I do hybrid stuff. I'm trying to make a YouTube channel work here. But I think for video shooters, these two things are a big deal. So one, put the timecode flash sync port thing on the side of the viewfinder like the SL3 and the SL3S. Another thing, just borrow the tech from Leica and slap it on there, Second is an optical low pass filter, an OLPF You saw that in the original S1H. I think they'll do that again in the S1H II. They could really just take the same one from the S1H and put it on there. It helps with moire and all that stuff, and softens things up for like sweet skin tones and all that kind of thing. So, not a bad outcome. I'm pretty sure they will do that. So yeah, that's kind of it. I could also mention, Fuji kind of taking like the XH2 versus XH2S route. I'm guessing that like it'll be a stack sensor like the XH2S was, but Fuji did the other way around, which I think was smarter, honestly. Come out with a faster scanning stack sensor camera first, then come out with a higher resolution photo camera. I just think there's more people looking for a stack sensor camera than there are for, high resolution photo cameras, especially from Lumix. The USP, the unique selling proposition, is stronger for video cameras from Lumix. They're going to sell those first, they're going to sell those faster, and they got to work to earn the photographers. So I don't totally understand this thing of releasing the photo camera first, because I think like a lot of people are just going to wait to see what the S1H II is, including photographers, especially if they like fast shooting. Because it's like, well, okay, it's not the 61 megapixel sensor from the SL3. It's this other sensor, like a 44 megapixel sensor. It's make it a 35 stack sensor on the video camera. Probably just get the video camera. It's probably not going to be that much difference, So I really don't know who's going to buy this camera except people with money, people that have recently invested in the L-mount Alliance system, and people that have L-mount lenses now, that just want that upgrade. But I think even a lot of those people, I would probably tell them, if they're on a tight budget, wait to see what the S1H II comes out with, what features it has, and then jump in for the S1R II once you know and can kind of decide which one fits your needs better. It's almost inevitable it's coming out, so wait the extra 2 months. Keep using your S5 IIs, which are pretty good for most things. Because yeah, the S1R Mark II feels like a top of the middle ground camera, not really like a flagship. And I'm hoping the S1H II is a true flagship, just for bragging rights, if nothing else. Just so Lumix users can say, we got the best cameras. They're super fun to use. They're nice to use, and they've got more features. We got anamorphic D-squeeze in camera. We've got open gate, 6, 8K, whatever it is, false color, all this stuff, right? Hopefully they put it in photo highlight blinkies in live view, and then like literally it's got everything. The only other thing at that point that Lumix could do to make me happy is come out with an S9 II with a viewfinder and all these features baked in, the fully articulating screen, viewfinder, all that stuff, or just a rangefinder camera. It could be an S6 or something, I don't know, an S4, whatever, a retro style camera. That would make me lose my freaking mind, would have my loyalty forever and ever. So anyway, that's about it. Have you been like binging S1R II videos on YouTube until this thing comes out and you can get your hands on it in a couple weeks? Do you agree that it's like a darn near perfect camera, but it's just kind of a bummer they didn't put a stack sensor in it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Like, comment, subscribe, all the good stuff, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.